got this guy sitting behind the camera today. Say hello. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today for you I have my 5 top tips on how to not get glutened when dining out. Over here in England we've finally been given the all clear to go back and sit in restaurants and eat, which is wonderful. We've not been able to do that since before Christmas, I don't think. A little bit about me, I pretty much never go out except if it's for food, which has been the case over lockdown as well. The only time I've left my house is once per week to go get my groceries, which isn't necessarily different to before lockdown, except that I would be going out to eat at restaurants. So I have been dearly missing eating out, especially in London, which has such accessible restaurants for gluten-free people. We're definitely spoilt for choice in this city, which is so lucky. I've got a list of restaurants that I need to revisit. Don't really have the wallet to match, but we'll get there when we get there. So because of the lifted restrictions and all of us going back out to eat, I thought we'd talk about 5 ways to avoid gluten when eating out. I popped a video up on my Instagram on Wednesday that was sort of like a parody of how to stay away from gluten, but these are my actual tips. Tip number 1, do your research first. This one is pretty obvious, but I thought it would be good to give you some tips on how best to research gluten-free places. Doing your research first can alleviate so much pressure when you're actually going out to eat, because it can give you a sense of security, like you're knowing where you're going, especially if you're the one to choose the restaurant. Sub-tip: be the one to choose the restaurant. Obviously that's not always possible, but in this case, if you are choosing the restaurant, the internet and Instagram are your best friend. I know that Google only has a bit of a problem with only showing you specific places. Like when I first got here, I was shown like 5 main gluten-free places and I thought, oh cool, 5 is heaps, but that's all I kind of thought was in the city. Little did I know there is so many more other places, which I found from websites, from bloggers. Pretty much wherever you are in the world, I can almost guarantee that a gluten-free blogger would have at least passed through your town and found out the good places to eat. So for example, if you're in London, Laura from My Gluten-Free Guide has the most extensive lists you could ever believe. She's got lists for London, she's got lists for East London in particular, she's got lists for North London, she's got lists for just fish and chip places that could be gluten-free. If you're in Christchurch, New Zealand, Sophie the Coeliac lives there. If you're in Massachusetts, you've got One Happy Stomach, Melissa, she lives there. You know, there is such an amazing community of gluten-free people online that have just a wealth of knowledge on where to eat, where the best things are, what places you might not have thought were gluten-free but actually turned out to be gluten-free. So yeah, obviously do your research first. The good thing about, maybe this is more specifically in the UK, but I hopefully feel like other countries are catching up on this, is that a lot of restaurants have their allergen lists all online. You can generally even see their allergen statement, which is like whether or not they cook in the same fryers, if they would consider themselves a may contain, or if they're accredited by the Coeliac Foundation in your country, so Coeliac UK here, or Coeliac NZ back in New Zealand. So for me, doing my research first would probably be one of the most important things, just so I can feel like I can eat out without having to worry too much, because thinking about whether or not there might be gluten in the meal ruins it. I just want to eat, I want to enjoy, I want to be in the moment. I don't want to be thinking, has a freaking crouton touched the salad? You know what I'm saying? Oh, and of course, Facebook groups for certain areas can be extremely useful for even asking specific questions about specific restaurants. I've seen questions be asked about a very specific donut in a very small town in North New Zealand, and 5 people answering it saying, yes, I've had that, it's fine. Yes, I've had that, it's fine. So yeah, that's also another good place to do your research. Tip number 2, call ahead. If you aren't satisfied with the information you can find online, just call ahead. You will get a very good sense of whether they understand what dietary requirements they can cater for just by calling. And I mean that in both a positive and negative way. Sometimes you'll be so lucky and you'll get someone pick up the phone and be like, you've got celiac disease? Hey, wonderful. I've got celiac disease. I totally know what that is. We're absolutely able to cater for you. And that's wonderful. And you'll be like, great. I've spoken to this person, I've had confirmation from someone who actually works there that I'll be able to eat there. On the other hand, you'll call the restaurant, someone will pick up and be like, oh, celiac disease, yeah. That's the one where you can't have celery? It's happened to me. And at that point, you can either ask to speak to a manager, speak to a chef even, but that gives you a pretty good indication that their staff aren't really trained up on dietary requirements, and that would raise a red flag for me. So whether it's a good or bad outcome from the phone call, you'll generally have a fair idea of the restaurant's level of knowledge of dietary requirements. Tip number 3, be confident. That's a lot easier said than done, am I right? The reason I say this is that you are a better communicator when you're speaking confidently about your dietary requirements. And that comes with time. If you are unconfident, it's really hard to go out there, be confident about your dietary requirements, perhaps in front of a group of people, and feel good about knowing the food you get is safe. At the beginning of my diagnosis, when I wasn't very confident, when I didn't want to make the whole table turn and go, why are you gluten-free? What's celiac disease? Tell us all about that, because I was just so embarrassed. I wouldn't really communicate my needs well to the waitstaff. So the feeling of not wanting to make it all about me at the table sort of informed how I was speaking to the waitstaff, really just, is this gluten-free? It is, okay, I'll grab it. Not asking those questions, not asking, is it fried in the same fryer as this item? Is it prepared in a different place? Does your chef know what celiac disease is? Can you provide me with a safe meal? I wasn't asking those questions because I was just so embarrassed and I didn't want to be made fun of. And unfortunately, a lot of the times I would get things with freaking croutons on it. So being confident, while it's really easy to say and not as easy to do, is something that I think is really important, because if you're able to communicate your needs, if you're able to get those things checked, to get the waitstaff to answer your questions, to have the confidence to go up and even talk to the chef or the manager, you will feel better eating the food you're served and you will have a better time eating out. If you're feeling embarrassed about doing it in front of the table, which sometimes I definitely do, depending on how well I know them, it might come as a shock to you. I'm actually quite an introvert. Seriously. You can very easily talk to your waitstaff in the beginning, let them know you're gluten-free, let them know you've got celiac disease or whatever allergies you have. Ask them to make a note, ask them to let the chefs know, and that way it's done all the way over there and you can go back to the table and feel like you've not made a fuss. I don't know what it is about the idea of making a fuss that is just so horrible. But yeah, I know being confident is hard and does take a lot of practice. So don't be too hard on yourself if you are unconfident or if you do forget to ask those questions. It's all a learning process. Take it easy. Number 4, don't take risks. Just not worth it. There has been several times in my celiac life that I have ordered something, seen it, not really been confident with how it was prepared and just not eaten it. At the end of the day, I'm glad I made those decisions because it definitely beats 3 weeks of constipation and diarrhea. One of the stories that I always think of, this was really early on when I was first diagnosed with celiac disease, is I was out for dinner with a big group of friends. Well, I knew a couple of people and it was their birthday and they brought all their other friends, so I didn't really know a lot of the people at the dinner, and this was very early on, and so I didn't want to make a fuss. I didn't want to make a fuss about being celiac or having to be gluten-free, so I went over to the waitstaff and I was like, I'm gluten-free, can you tell me what on the menu is gluten-free? And they were like, gluten? Gluten? And I was like, yeah, flour, wheat, soy sauce. All the while my hope for actually eating dinner is just slowly slipping away. And they went to the chef and the chef started to look confused. And I was like, this is not a good idea. And I was like, look, is there a way you can just toss me some vegetables in a pan and serve me that? And they're like, oh yeah, okay. I'm like, with no sauce, just vegetables in a pan. I'll eat that, just with some plain rice, with nothing else, no soy sauce, nothing. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I think we can do that. And I'm like, great. It came out covered in sauce. And I was mulling it over whether or not to eat it. And I was leaning towards not eating it. And that was cemented when someone thought the vegetables were for the table and put their noodly fork into the vegetables and ate it. It's safe to say I went home hungry that night. Oh, and I just remembered I paid for it as well because I didn't want to make a fuss. And this ties back into confidence as well. At the end of the day, you've just got to remember you probably won't see those people again and you won't have explosive diarrhea. So, win-win. Lastly, tip number 5, bring emergency snacks. And that ties into the last one as well. You've got nothing to eat, don't worry, you've got a freaking granola bar in your bag. To be fair, I think this is something you learn pretty quickly when you're a celiac, especially if you are partial to getting a bit hangry. Always have something delicious on you. And I want to emphasize delicious because there is nothing worse than going out with your friends who are all eating fish and chips and you've not been able to find anything for your celiac diet and you pull out a freaking nut granola bar and you're like, I don't even like this flavor, and then you want to cry. So invest in snacks that you actually enjoy. At the moment, I'm really enjoying having Lexi's marshmallow bar things on hand because they're yummy and I enjoy eating them. Also like salted cashews, stuff like that. Things that will keep me full, tied over until I can actually find something substantial to eat. But also enjoy eating. when I went to Japan in 2019, my bag was full of snacks because I was really worried that they wouldn't have enough food for gluten-free people, which is kind of true, kind of not true. But I bought a bunch of protein bars, and I don't even like protein bars. There is something about the taste of protein, like in any form, that I can always tell, and I don't like it. But anyway, I bought a bunch of protein bars to take with me. Didn't end up eating one. What a waste. So yeah, always have an emergency snack and make sure it's delicious. So that brings us to the end of the video. Hopefully you have gotten some sort of useful information out of this. If you've got tips yourself, don't forget to leave in the comments below so we can all learn from them. I will say though, I feel very lucky to be living in London that has so many dedicated gluten-free places. A lot of the times that's where I'll dine and I won't even have those issues. And so just quick shout out to all those gluten-free places. These are the ones in London that I love. And if you're ever here or if you live here and haven't been to one of those, you got to go to one of these. They're delicious. All of them. But yeah, that's it from me today. Hopefully you're having a wonderful day wherever you are, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!